we come up with anything, over.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Breakers, a podcast about shipwrecks, loss, and lessons learned from maritime disasters. My name's Tanner. I will be joined, as usual, by Taylor, and as has been the case lately, we will also be joined by Jess, because we are continuing the story of the Karluk. We do have one patron to shout out before we get started. That is Zax M. Thank you so much for supporting us over there on Patreon. We hope you enjoy the stuff you find over there. So let's get into it. We have a lot of ground to cover today, physically, geographically, and, metaphorically. So let's get everyone involved here. How is it going, everyone?
Pretty good. It's the weather's nice. It's not hot in Ohio anymore.
Yes, I am so happy with the weather. I just have the windows open, just having a great time.
How are things in Wisconsin?
It has cooled off here for sure, which is good because our students, or the bulk of our students, just arrived this past week, so they don't have to experience the bad part of Wisconsin weather. They get to come here right when it's getting nice.
Until the winter time.
We're now on the main campus at UW-Oshkosh, so it is much more like a real college campus. It is a real college campus with students walking around on it in multiple buildings, so it's been great.
Yeah, that probably is kind of cool being on a bigger campus, actually, and you get more of the real college experience from like the professor side of things.
The vibe is just better overall.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of university, speaking of learning, what kind of media have we been consuming in the week since we recorded last?
I am still plugging away at a couple of the media that I listed in the last few episodes. I'm still working on When the Ice is Gone and also Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club. Mostly, it's been kind of a crazy week at work for me, so I haven't had as much time to check in and read as I usually do, but I am still chipping away at those two things.
Nice.
Yeah, I guess it's rare that we have to bring a guest back the week after they've already done a media check-in. So there's a lot of pressure. I got to finish this so I can do something else in the media check-in.
There are times I'm like, what did I do this week? What have I done?
Yeah, that's what I've been dealing with. It's like, what have I read? What have I watched this week? And it's like, well, actually, you've pretty much just worked this week. You haven't done a whole lot of anything else. So that's been my primary activity.
Weeks are like that.
Yeah. But what's nice is that I do have a pretty long commute to work. So I am able to chip away at some audiobooks. And so that's how I'm doing the Lakeside Supper Club book, is via audiobook. So I am still making some progress, even though I haven't had a ton of free time to do my media stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, my new commute is much better for podcasts. My old one was, some days like 10 minutes, and that's not really enough time to really get into anything.
No, that's like a couple songs.
Yeah, now it's like most days it's more like 25. So it's like that's a much, much better chunk of content I can consume in that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
I started a new book. I finished The Broken Spears, but I was still on an Aztec kick. So I started a book called Fifth Sun, A New History of the Aztecs by Camilla Townsend from 2019. This one is a bit more, it's obviously it's more modern. It's a more scholarly look at the Aztecs compared to kind of the first person accounts from the Broken Spears. All those accounts included in the Broken Spears also really, in some ways, at some level, they're all sort of run through a Spanish filter because of how they were originally published. Even the ones that were originally written in Nahuatl, those accounts, the originals don't really survive, but like maybe a Spanish translation of it does. So you get a certain, view of things there. And this is just a bit more outside third person view of the quote unquote Aztecs. They didn't call themselves the Aztecs, but
nice.
In some ways it reminds me of the book A Shark Going Inland Is My Chief about ancient Hawaii that one of our listeners had recommended a while ago. I loved that book. And this is sort of a similar thing, looking kind of deeper into the history of a people that we don't really hear that part of it. We've talked about this before on the show. For Americans, groups like the Aztec, the Maya, the Inca, they kind of only exist as a foil for the Europeans. We don't really learn about them before those contact periods. So it's a very cool read, and I'm still very into the topic. But we have a topic that we are all very into right now, as are many of our listeners.
What about my media check-in?
No media check-in for you.
You get none.
What have you been doing?
I've been kind of busy actually yesterday. Well, the first part of the weekend, I guess I should say. It was my oldest daughter's birthday, so she is 11. And we
happy
did
birthday.
some pottery.
Wow.
We did pottery painting.
I started grad school 11 years ago. That's crazy.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? We did like this place in the mall that you can do like pottery painting, and then they'll fire it and everything for you when you're done. So it was fun. She had some friends come and do that with her and all the usual things. So that was a good day. It was busy, but it was fun. Of course, it started right as the Ohio State game ended. So that was a thing. How inconsiderate of her to be born during the first week of college football.
How dare.
And that is my transition to my second media check-in, which is college football's back. And the world's a better place for it.
Because I've been so into baseball this season, I didn't quite have the same build-up and anticipation for the football season. Yesterday was really exciting.
As a Cincinnati Reds fan, it's just like normal that once September rolls around, it's like, well, it's football season now.
I've poured a lot more sports energy of this calendar year into baseball than I normally do because the Brewers are so good. Football has, I do feel it now. Seeing the Buckeyes out there winning a big game. First week of the season, that was cool. That's always electric. Lee Corso's final headgear, it's very sappy and was very predictable, but it was also, I think, what the sports world needed.
Seeing Ryan Day's freshly just for men goatee.
It looks better now.
That thing is dark. It's dark. Yeah, it was a fun day though. There's still more fun today. I'm looking forward to Miami and Notre Dame playing tonight. So that's my media check-in.
All your media's checked in now.
I have checked my media in.
I did want to say we have a place like that, the pottery painting in Oshkosh that Katie and I went to a few years ago, actually. It's a great experience.
It's actually way more fun than I thought it would be.
Surprisingly engaging, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I painted a little, I don't even know if it's a dragon or a seahorse. I think it's a dragon, though. We have a episode to continue. We are getting into part 3 of the Karluk. So in part 1, what did we cover in part 1? We covered getting the team together. We covered...
Can I say that I was terrified you were going to call on me like you're a teacher? Like, what did we learn in section 1? Taylor,
did you read your notes? Did you read them?
Would you like to speak on it? No.
Who remembers what we talked about in part 1? We have, of course, our big figures. We have Stefansson, sort of, in the story. We have Bartlett, and then we have, all of these rich developing personalities who are still in our big main group here. In part 2, what were the highlights from part 2? Taylor, you were absent for that one.
I was.
So part 2, we talked about them being... Did we end part 2 with the ship actually sinking?
We did, yeah. Well, we ended part 2 with the ship sinking, and then we did a little check-in with Steph about what he was up to. So he was out causing trouble with the Southern Party, but the ship goes down, and everybody is just kind of stranded on an ice floe trying to figure out what their next move is going to be, and then cut to Steph going out and bothering the Southern Party, and then taking that sweet, sweet blank checkbook from the Canadian government, buying a new ship, and reforming the Northern Party and heading north.
That's what I was going to do. I thought there was some kind of post I wanted to make, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to take the promotional poster from the movie Blank Check and put Stefansson's face over the main character. I'll do that at some point. The old school way with bad cut and paste, not with AI.
As God intended, yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
the way these things are supposed to happen. The Karluk is gone. That means they're going to have to set up camp on the ice. This is men, women, and children on the ice. Now, can any of my Rugrats fans tell me what's a dinosaur to do when there's kids on the ice?
Somebody call their mom.
That's what I would hope.
That is a violent flashback. I have not thought about Rugrats for 25 years. That
was
just
a good
came
one.
Roaring back out of nowhere from the
Roaring
deep
like
recesses
Reptar.
of my brain. Like Reptar. I still remember the song. Wow.
Yeah, multiple times in life, probably 3 or 4, I have worked in the line, what's a dinosaur to do when there's kids on the ice, in a conversation with people like roughly my age. Everyone is always just like, what?
What'd you say? Nothing.
No one remembers Reptar on ice.
It's a shame.
We don't have Reptar here, but we do have plenty of other people. Bartlett's assessment of their situation is...
Hold on, I was reading something for section 2.
Are you on the Rugrats Wikipedia?
No, not anymore. Had we been on a desert island, things might have been brighter. But to be out there on the ever-shifting pack, far from land, and faced with the coldest months of the winter night, I could not look ahead without some uneasiness.
I do think it's funny in the notes, my abbreviations for the Ice Master and Empire of Ice and Stone. Because for Empire of Ice and Stone, it's EIS, or the German word ice for ice.
Oh.
Little double entendre there. So along with McKinley quickly becoming his second in command, Bartlett took inventory of what they had managed to get off the ship in time. So out on the ice, in a storehouse that they had built, they have
70 suits of underwear,
200 pairs Jaeger socks,
6 fleece suits,
100 fawn skins,
20 deer skins,
36 woolen shirts,
3 rolls of Burberry gabardine,
30 Jaeger caps,
2 rolls Jaeger blanketing,
2 large sacks of skin boots, about 100 pairs.
I have the wrong pairs here. 100 pairs would be a nice little treat to have here.
They would appreciate 100 pairs. Absolutely.
They do need some fruit.
I bet they do.
They really do.
100 pairs Jaeger mitts.
6 Jaeger sweaters.
4 Burberry hunting suits.
12 seal skins.
6 heavy winter skins.
2 large sacks of deer legs.
2 bearded seal skins.
20 mattresses.
And 50 Jaeger blankets.
2 large sacks of deer skins sounds like something you'd pick up in the Fallout universe.
Do either of you remember, I forget if it's a College Humor video or if it's a Funny or Die video, about the Twinkie company closing?
Maybe.
Is that Little Debbie or Hostess?
Deep down, I think I do remember this.
I'll have to share it, but it devolves into them listing a bunch of other stuff that no one knew that company made.
That's right.
Like,
I do remember that now.
Okay. That's vaguely familiar, yes.
Twinkies, Sprinkies, foot butts, fuckums, sticks in a bag. This reads very similar to that. 2 large sacks deer skins. Also, by Jaeger, is this a specific style? I mean, it just means hunter in German, I know, but is this like a style or a company that makes these things?
I'm pretty sure it's a company because you see Jaeger and Burberry both listed. And I know Burberry is a company that still exists. And Burberry started off as a rugged outdoors wear type of company. But
like when American Eagle actually was an outfitter.
Because I'm hoping and imagining that these are all just Jägermeister branded items that they've received in like giveaways and stuff.
My brain immediately goes to Pacific Rim and like the giant robots. Like these are all giant robot branded things that are going to punch kaiju. Okay, Jaeger is a British fashion brand and retailer of women's wear and menswear. So they have been around since 1884. Okay, it is a brand. Originally established as a brand to make wool jersey long johns, inspired by the theories of German scientist Dr. Gustav Jaeger.
Never like to hear that.
Thank you, Wikipedia.
Never like to hear about the
German
theories of German
scientists. Always a sketchy combination.
Yeah.
Why are you measuring my skull for these these pants I'm trying to buy here? So they have some additional supplies outside. There is another list, but I don't think we need to list them all again. To move all these supplies, the party had 9 sledges and 18 usable sled dogs. Usable is a word that kind of paints a sad story when you're talking about dogs.
Yeah.
It does. That's another thing with all. I think I told you in the last episode, Polar Stories, things rarely go well for the sled dogs, and this is no exception. A lot of the sled dogs would have just been worn down and too broken down to be able to work anymore. And also then, of course, you have like puppies or dogs that are very old. So there's always going to be some dogs that are there but are not able to participate. And unfortunately, the harsh reality of it is that they are consuming food that could go to a dog that was working. So unfortunately, these stories do not end well for a lot of the dogs.
Yeah, I know in part 2 when we talked about Molly having a litter of puppies and how in one of the books it says that, most of the puppies survived. And I was thinking, but did they though? Did they really?
Yeah. And this is something that it's very difficult, I think, especially for people, we're all pet lovers here. It's especially difficult to think about bad things happening to animals when you love animals, but it's unfortunately a constant in these stories. And there's a very good reason why, for example, you are not allowed to take sled dogs to Antarctica anymore, just because of the environmental impact and also just because of the cruelty often involved in having working dogs in the polar regions.
You've got a mobile dog cannibalism machine, basically.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
Yep.
So with these 9 sledges and 18 dogs, this isn't close to what they would need to move everything. They've got quite a bit of stuff here. The only real option to get all or most of this is double hauling. Taylor, you're into logistics. This might sound cool or frustrating.
It doesn't sound great because that back haul back to get your second load is unproductive.
So yeah, they're taking smaller loads a certain distance, setting out a trail, and then returning to shipwreck camp and loading up for another run. So you're having to cover every bit of ground twice.
Which consumes resources each time, too. That's the thing. Like, talking about thinking of the dogs as a resource, like, that's more wear and tear on the dogs than the sledges.
Yeah, the dogs, the sledges, the men are going to have to eat more, consume more calories in order to exert the effort to pull that stuff twice. It's not an ideal way to travel.
If your sled drivers are union, they're going to want to take a break. And so without more dogs, some of these sledges need to be man-hauled. Again, thinking back to scenes of this from the Terror of having to just like strap themselves up and literally pull these things. So Karluk had gone under on January 11th. However, they're not going to see the sun back until January 25th. And it not exactly advisable to start before or significantly before that. So they kind of just have to wait until closer to that time.
One thing I was just thinking about, though, like not seeing the sun for days has got to really mess with you. And you think about these crazy survival situations we've read, like the Essex, and how hopeless that must have felt at some certain points. This has to feel worse. Like just knowing that you are absolutely like, you're not going anywhere anytime soon. And oh, by the way, there's no sun for a week. So enjoy that.
And you can't even, get your momentum and get started right away because you've got to you've got to be able to see where you're going, especially when you're going across, ice flows with tons of cracks in the ice and so many potential disasters along the way. You have to be able to see where you're going. That is at minimum a non-negotiable. And you can't even do that right away. You've got to sit on your butt and wait until you can start seeing the sun again. Then you can get going.
Yeah, last weekend there was a day where I slept late and it was like really dark and overcast. And even that threw off my clock for the whole day. So yeah, like not seeing the sun for months at a time, I can't imagine is beneficial. So on the 13th, land is sighted and identified as Wrangel Island.
It appeared to be just 35 or 40 miles away, though distances on the polar plane were deceiving. It might be as far as 80 or even 100 miles. Still, the sighting caused general cheer, and when Mallet took a reading, it showed latitude 72 degrees north, already a full 12 miles south of where the Karluk had sunk. The prevailing winds had shifted, and now they were moving towards the island. This was even better news. Maybe the winds would push them right to the shore.
So that was from Empire of Ice and Stone. Also, for those of you looking at the notes, you'll notice that I was able to use the degree symbol after 72 because I was typing this on my MacBook. Very easy hotkey compared to the PC. To improve their chances of survival, they would first need to get off the ice as soon as possible. But like we just mentioned, there's no way they can move their camp with all of these supplies at once. Multiple trips are going to be needed. This is where we get our first advance shore party. So this is going to be a party that is going to head to Wrangel Island, establish a base camp, get things sort of set up there so that when the rest follow, there's a place for them to be.
Ain't no party like a Wrangel Island party.
Mayman is chosen to lead this advanced team. He is going to be with mates Sandy Anderson and Charles Barker, Ned Golightly / Archie King, and George Malloch. I might be mixing these up. So we talked about this last time. On this trip, are they calling him Ned or Archie? What do they think his name is?
Probably it's very unlikely that he could have pulled the wool over their eyes the entire time, because he's a very posh British guy, and very clearly does not have the sailing skills that his papers would indicate that he has. So I really don't know what they called him, but I think it was common knowledge that he was not Archie King. So I'm not sure which name they would have gone with, but either way, I think that they knew that his actual identity was not what he was claiming it was, but I can't say what they called him. And this is what's so frustrating about not having surviving diaries from a lot of these guys, because in McKinley's diary, they call him King, but they, in the very beginning, they might have thought he was king. They probably didn't know the truth of it until later on they got to know each other a little better.
You just don't strike me as an Archie. Is there anything you want to tell us?
Yeah.
So yeah, I know you had a note here about what we've talked a bit about Mayman. We know he's strong and athletic, so it makes sense you'd want him to go. What about the rest of this group?
This is something that's really interesting to me, that you have these 4 guys that you've chosen for this advanced party, and you put Mayman in charge of them. Mayman, who is a junior scientist, and you put him in charge of a shore party containing the first and second mate. That seems a little off to me. Also, maybe this is just from years of being a Trekkie, but taking your first and your second mate and putting them in the same shore party and sending them out seems also like a really bad idea to me. So these are things that I kind of wonder about. And these things were kind of brought up again in that article that we've been talking about, the Janice Cavell article, where she talks about how maybe there was sort of an ulterior motive for choosing these men. She kind of hypothesizes that there was more tension between Bartlett and the ship's crew than maybe was let on by the other sources that we have, by McKinley's diary, by Bartlett's notes. So she is talking about how there was really a decent amount of animosity, she thinks, between Bartlett and the crew, a lot of that having to do with the fact that instead of evacuating the ship like immediately after it sank and making for land then, or not when it sank, when it was frozen in and making for land, that Bartlett chose to stay on the ship and allow the ship to drift and to drift further and further away from the coast. So she's hypothesizing that there was animosity there, and that these men that were chosen for this party may have been kind of the biggest challenges to Bartlett's authority, or at least maybe some of the more vocal challengers to Bartlett's authority. That's kind of her hypothesis as to why these particular men were chosen and not other men that maybe might make a little more sense on paper. And she also is suggesting that the reason that Mayman was put in charge was because at this point, he and McKinley were very loyal to Bartlett. They were very close, and they didn't present a meaningful challenge to Bartlett's authority. So that is what her hypothesis is, that this was why this took place this way. And then it gets into, in the next section, it talks a little bit about how Malloch was not really interested in being in this party, and he had a lot of anxiety about it. Do you want to get into that now, or do you want to save that for later?
I had made a note here about how Malloch is originally selected to be in this party based on, Captain Bartlett's assessment. And then, over, the next couple of days, Malloch comes to Bartlett and he expresses a desire to not go on this. He wants to be replaced. Bartlett sort of tries to, reassure him, sort of talk him down a little bit, saying that he knows he's fit for this task, but probably wisely decides that he doesn't want Malloch out there if Malloch isn't totally committed to the bit. So instead, Seaman John Brady is chosen as a sub for Malloch. And I know a little earlier than this in both sources, they talk a bit about Malloch's some of his kind of increasingly erratic behavior that kind of starts on the ship and seems to just sort of get worse.
So while the Karluk was still afloat and while they were still on the ship, there were a couple instances where Malik kind of expressed some odd behavior. There was an instance where he and McKinley were in the cabin deluxe, which was the room that a lot of the scientists were sleeping in on the ship. And he comes up behind McKinley and grabs him. Now, Malik is a big guy, and McKinley is a very small guy. He's like 5'4", 140 pounds or something to that effect. Malik comes up behind him, gets him in a bear hug, and like picks him up and shakes him. And McKinley was, I'm sure a little freaked out by this because here's this big guy who's been acting kind of strangely. You don't know, is this a friendly gesture or is he actually trying to kill me? Interestingly enough, it was not recorded in McKinley's diary. McKinley did not write about this, but Mayman, who saw the whole thing, wrote about it in his diary. And he definitely thought that it was, not a friendly gesture, that it was something that was either designed to intimidate or just one of those random, unexplainable behaviors by somebody who's maybe not on the best terms with reality. So that was something that happened. Also, there were a couple instances of Malik deciding that instead of sleeping in his cabin, that he was going to go sleep in an unheated room on the ship by himself. So he took all of his furs and blankets and everything and went and slept by himself and froze because there was no stove there. And that no explanation was given for why this happened. It was just sort of an odd thing. And once the ship goes down and they're out on the ice, Malik displays a lot of disregard for his own health and safety by just not wearing shoes a lot of the time and getting very, very frostbitten feet. So this is a kind of a reoccurring theme. This man just does not want to wear shoes. So there's a lot of the men, I think, are struggling with the dark and the stress of the situation. And some of them are starting, the cracks are starting to show. And I think we can see that with Malik. So there's the question about his mental stability, but also there's the very real issue of Malik is the guy who used this chronometer. And he was the one who was saying, hey, that land that we see up there, I think it's Herald Island. I don't think it's Wrangel Island. And everyone else, including the captain, said, no, we think that the chronometer is actually more wrong than these readings indicate. And we think it's Wrangel Island. So Malik thinks that it's Herald Island, and he's a very prominent, intelligent young geologist. He's aware of the differences between Wrangel Island and Herald Island, and I'm sure that he knows there's nothing good on Herald Island. And I can understand that if you believe this piece of land to be Herald Island and not Wrangel Island, why you would not be dying to go with an advanced shore party to try to set up camp there when you know that there's nothing but high rocky walls and very little plant and animal life waiting for you.
Given our current media landscape, would you say that Malik is being gaslit by the rest of the crew?
Yeah, I think a little bit. And there is a legitimate question of how broken are our tools. So I think that I can definitely understand how there would be differences of opinion on this. But I think that when the guy who's been taking the readings pretty consistently, and who probably knows the most about this particular instrument that you're working with, when he says something, chances are he's not lying about it or making it up. But I think that the rest of the crew very badly wanted to believe that this was Wrangel Island. And so they were maybe willing to suspend disbelief a little bit. So gaslighting, possibly, yeah.
So this advance party, they left shipwreck camp on the morning of January 21st. So this is 1914 we're in now. They're able to make a few hours progress before having to stop and construct an igloo for the night. Over the next few days, they make some more progress, covering as much as 11 miles some days, which sounds pretty good.
Yeah, all things considered.
Considering the terrain, yeah.
On January 29th, the landscape of the ice changed dramatically, though, growing into ridges up to 60 feet high. So I guess kind of a good thing and bad thing. It is bad in that you now have to go through and over these ice ridges, but this does kind of tell you that you are approaching land as the nature of the ice is shifting. So there is an additional problem, though, that comes up overnight. Mayman comes to the conclusion that no, this is not Wrangel Island. Realizing this is way too small to be Wrangel, this actually probably is, Mr. Malik, Herald Island. This is the one that they did not want to go to, because we talked a bit about the topography. It's very rocky. The sides of it are very sheer. It's hard to physically get onto this island, even if you can reach it. There's not much there if you are able to get there. Very little plant, and I think they said no animal life on Herald Island. So very...
Wrangel Island is fairly desolate. Herald Island is even worse.
Right. It's like a smaller, worse version.
I'm looking at Herald Island here, and it looks like one of these islands, random little islands that would be part of an atoll in the like Southern Pacific, but just with none of the charm or niceness that the tropics provide.
Yeah, just rocks. Lots of rocks.
I bet there's birds. I'm sure there's always birds.
There's probably birds, yeah.
As a leader, Mayman has to make a big decision. They do need to get on land as soon as possible. But Bartlett and the others have to know that, okay, this did not go as planned. This is not the right island. We can't, go forward with that part of the plan.
Justice for Malik.
Exactly. Malik totally vindicated. Acquitted of all charges.
See, it's proof that you can be creepy, but also productive and helpful at work.
Mm-hmm.
You can do both.
Yeah.
Why not both?
The weird guy can still accomplish things. Good for him.
So Mayman designates Sandy Anderson as the leader of the men and has them make for Herald Island. I'm sure the ship's first mate is very thankful. Like, oh, thank you for putting me in charge now that, the captain's not
Thank
here.
you, random scientist, the junior scientist, not even the senior scientist, like the youngest guy and the last hired. Like, hey, thanks for allowing me, the first mate, to be in charge of this party.
And I forget, I think at least one of the books brings this up, is I'm sure there is an actual Admiralty law answer to this question, but it does call into question, does the hierarchy still hold when the ship is gone? Is the captain still the captain of these dudes if he has no ship?
I would say so. Again, going back to something like the Essex, right? The captain's still the captain, somewhat.
The technical answer, I believe the technical answer, and somebody much more knowledgeable about maritime law than me can correct it, but technically I think that the captain's authority over the men, at least over the scientists and the expedition, ended when the ship went down. I am unsure about his authority over the ship's crew, because we're dealing with kind of two separate groups here. So
I feel like the crew he would still hold some authority over.
Yeah, even if it was not technically legal for him to hold the authority over the crew, I feel like the crew are going to listen to the captain, whether it's technically they have to or not. But the debate about whether or not he still holds that authority over the scientists, I think, is a much more interesting question with much more interesting implications.
They'll have to settle that in science court.
Blue French flag is science court. That's how you know you're there. The gold fringe is maritime law.
So Mayman himself is going to head back to Shipwreck Camp.
Shipwreck Camp sounds like an experience that you could buy into now.
An immersive theater experience.
Do we feel like making some lame chat GPT thing where we can host a Shipwreck Camp, but it's like that Willy Wonka thing from UK last year? Just really lame.
No, we don't. Mayman is going to head back to Shipwreck Camp. That is a phrase that comes up a lot in these, next little bit of people having to go back to Shipwreck Camp.
There's so much going back and forth in this section. This entire section of this story is just, and then these guys went here, and then they came back to camp, and then they went here, and then they came back to camp.
I would have included more detail, but it's kind of like in both situations, you would really just be reading a bunch of they went here, they went here, they went back here.
It's kind of like when a video game needs to cram a couple more hours of playtime in, so they give you a bunch of fetch quests to do just to pad out the game.
Yeah, and so many of the things are just like going back for supplies and then coming back to camp, going back to scout ahead at this other location and then coming back to camp. You really, in order to keep track of it, almost need one of those conspiracy bulletin boards with the pins and threads connecting. So it is not an easy thing to keep track of all of the different trips that they took. And ultimately, I don't know that it matters to the overall story. I mean, obviously, we're going to cover the most important back and forth trips, but does it matter that two guys went back to Shipwreck Camp for dog pemmican? Ultimately, not so much.
God, there's a cursed phrase.
Dog pemmican four
for
dogs.
the dogs,
Pemmican
right?
4 dogs, yes. So there were multiple kinds of pemmican. There was pemmican 4 dogs, not of dogs, but 4 dogs.
I was definitely, when I first heard it, was like the dog pemmican.
No, and then there were 2 brands of human pemmican. One was Hudson's Bay pemmican, and one was Underwood pemmican.
Don't like that phrase anymore.
No, but so yeah, dog pemmican is more nutritionally balanced for dogs, for the dog diet, as opposed to for the human diet. Hilariously enough, of course, humans would end up eating a lot of the dog pemmican as we go on, as they become more and more desperate. But no, dog pemmican is not composed of dogs; it is for dogs. Although I can see why you would be concerned.
Yeah, in this specific situation, hard to know.
I mean, honestly, you didn't have time to make the dog pemmican if you were in a dog eating situation here. It's more of a, it's fresh.
Yeah.
I imagine.
So before they said their goodbyes, Anderson, he gives Mayman a letter to bring to Captain Bartlett. And this letter reads,
Dear Sir, I don't know whether you will altogether approve of my action in sending the dogs back before actually landing, but as there is the possibility of having to wait several days before the ice closes again, I thought it best under the circumstances to camp here for the present, and to endeavor, when the opportunity occurs, to do the remainder by hand, especially as you will be anxious about the returning party.
I don't know if the identity of the island will naturally upset your plans, but I will proceed under the original instructions as if it were Wrangel Island and await developments. Mayman is taking a list of the stores in our position, so I will refrain from giving one. I regret to report that one of the dogs was killed, although we had very little trouble previously. Hoping Mayman gets back quickly and safely, and all is well in camp. I beg to remain your obedient servant, A. Anderson.
Nothing? No Hamilton here? You're set up for a Hamilton.
I don't think anybody wants me to sing that, but,
We have a way of somehow working that into like half of our episodes.
I can just pick one of the many times we've referenced it before and drop it in somewhere. So 3 days later, Mayman arrives back at Shipwreck Camp. And so he's going to have a few days to rest and recover. Now we have, 3 or 4 people out on the ice with Anderson?
4. We've got Anderson and 3 others. Anderson and the second mate, and then 2 sailors out on the ice on Herald Island.
So around this time, the foursome of Dr. Mackay, Murray, Beauchamp, and Morris, so this is the group that had wanted to leave, they are making their final decisions about their next course of action. And they inform Bartlett that they are going to be leaving camp on February 5th. That Cavell article spends some time discussing this and kind of puts a bit more of a sinister spin on Bartlett's sort of reaction and, how he's working with this group that wants to leave. So how does Bartlett react to this? What's sort of the relationship between them as this group is getting ready to leave?
I am sure that there was a lot of genuine animosity between Bartlett and these scientists, because the scientists had been challenging Bartlett's authority since the start. And especially whenever Bartlett made the decision to stay on the ship as it drifted instead of trying to make for land much, much earlier, there was genuinely a lot of built up animosity between Bartlett and between these 4 scientists, especially Murray and Mackay. So whenever Murray and Mackay and Beauchamp and Morris announced that they were looking to strike out for land, Bartlett's reaction was maybe a little callous. There are records of him saying, Scotland will be just fine without Mackay. And some of this is from Bartlett did write his own book, but there are drafts of that book that were maybe a little harsher with some things that did not make the final cut of the book. And I believe that's what that comes from, either a draft of Bartlett's book or possibly a letter. But he basically is saying, if they leave, I kind of don't care. In fact, it might actually be better if they leave. Now, Bartlett believes that there is no chance that they're going to make it to Wrangel Island. And so, in a sense, allowing them to leave or kind of wishing for them to leave amounts to they probably won't be coming back. So there is this question of, is Bartlett kind of willingly, gleefully sending them to their deaths? Or so it's not a nice situation. And he had refused to meet with them several times. The scientists had come to him with like a written demand for a meeting saying, hey, we want to talk about this. We want to talk about leaving the ship and trying to, get our records off the ship and maximize the amount of stuff that we can get off the ship with us and maximize our chances for survival. And Bartlett just consistently refused to meet with them. And then in his book, he doesn't really talk about any of these meetings. So it just kind of got pushed under the rug of the official narrative. And there isn't a record in any of the current popular sources of Bartlett just sort of ignoring these repeated requests for a meeting and just telling him, nope, this is what we're doing. So eventually when it does come to blows and they present him with this formal letter that, hey, we're leaving now, actually, the sources that we have now primarily frame that as, look at these irrational scientists, look at them, thinking that they know better than the ice master, than the captain, and trying to arrogantly say that they can strike out on their own. But as more and more of the information comes out, it's very possible that they had a valid point, that they believed that they were closer to Wrangel Island and that they could make it there fairly quickly. And so there's a lot of interesting speculation that can kind of take place in that space about how much they knew and what Bartlett's real feelings were towards them. And I'm sure that, he genuinely didn't care for them. I mean, Mackay was pretty obnoxious, and I can say that because I'm a Mackay fan, but he's pretty obnoxious. And these guys were very very loud and very opinionated. And Bartlett, as the ship's captain, is used to having this unquestioned authority. He's not used to having people pushing back and asking questions and saying, well, why are we doing this? Well, this actually doesn't make sense for us. He had no real experience supervising scientists. And this is a tension that happens over and over in these polar stories. You have the ship's captain who is used to supervising seamen and crew members who will say, yes, sir, and do whatever's asked of them. And then you introduce scientists who are, by their nature, more free thinking and are not part of the rigid hierarchical structure of your typical sailing vessel. And there's often tension between captains and scientists. So that's not unusual. But there's the question, too, that this article raises about the possibility of the records. I know we talked a little bit in the last episode about how to scientists, the records are, the most important thing. You said that you'd read First Rate Tragedy. So you've read the story about how the Polar Party from the Terra Nova, how they found fossils in the tent with them, how they carried these fossils for miles and miles as they were actively dying, because the work and the science was so important that they were willing to do whatever they could to preserve the records of these discoveries that they've made. So scientists as a whole will do pretty much anything to preserve access to their discoveries. That is something that they are very, very passionate about. So there is speculation in this article that possibly Bartlett had dangled the idea of the records in front of them by saying, if you leave now, you take your records. And if you don't leave now, the records are staying behind. That's certainly a more sinister thing to consider. Not only are we more or less encouraging these guys to go probably to their death, but we're kind of dangling the one thing in front of them like a carrot that we know would make them do it. And again, this is a pretty new article that a lot of this is based on, but it makes a lot of sense. And it certainly adds another dimension to Bartlett as a leader, and is certainly something that's interesting to consider. So, whatever factors were involved in that decision, these four men do decide to set off on their own to Wrangel Island. Originally, it was reported that Bartlett had offered them dogs and that they had turned down the dogs. But of course, this kind of calls into question, were they really offered dogs? We don't know. But they were given their share of the remaining supplies. And so they set out for what they believed to be Wrangel Island.
That article raises this a little bit, and it kind of raises an interesting sort of, I think ultimately it's a very academic question and not a very, it doesn't practically matter that much of, whether was Is Bartlett doing this, quote unquote, hoping that this group will die, or simply hoping and appreciating the fact that they will not be there? I think there's some moral daylight between those two things of I want these people to die versus I don't want these people to be here. Even if
and the second position,
pragmatically it is the same thing here. In this situation.
And I think the second position is incredibly understandable, because if you're the ship's captain and you are trying to hold this group together, by any means necessary, and you have this group of mouthy, lazy, disobedient scientists who have their own ideas about how things would go, I can understand the impulse to just say, you know what, go, get out, leave us alone. We will keep it together here. You go do whatever you need to do. Is that morally the same as actively wishing for their death or actively putting them in a position to die? I don't know. I think that that's, again, a very academic question and not super relevant to the story, but it's certainly interesting to think about.
They leave on the 5th. On February 7th, Mayman is recovered enough to head back out with Karluk and with Karluk. Mayman is just getting ground down to pieces here. He keeps on getting hurt. He keeps on having to go on these treks back and forth, and then he has to recover. His knee is just totally
mm-hmm. And this poor guy, he is, even though he's a 22-year-old champion skier, there is truly only so much you can put your body through, even if you are a 22-year-old champion skier, and will never be in better shape than you are at this moment. Just with that knee injury and with the constant, Mayman, go do this, Mayman, go do this. He was very, very tired and worn down.
And on this particular foray, they are trying to catch up with the advance party. And bringing Bartlett's sextant and his artificial horizon. So this can help them, track their position, the position of the island better. Mayman's group departs shipwreck camp with 3 loaded sleds and 17 sled dogs. But they don't get very far. They don't even get 2 miles down the trail. Mayman's group has to stop. They have come across Chafe and Clam, who they had been taking supplies forward for caching purposes. And when Mayman's group finds them, Clam had apparently just fallen through the ice and gotten soaked through. Although, fortunately, Chafe was able to at least pull him to safety. Which is not a given in these situations. But now he is thoroughly soaked, and that is quickly gonna put him in a bad state. So he's not going to be able to continue. He has to go back to camp. Maurer volunteers to bring him back, with Monroe taking Clam's place with Chafe. A lot of swapping places here.
Yeah, there is.
But again, I think ultimately it's not that important until we get to kind of the final configurations here.
Yeah.
So they'd hardly gotten back on the trail when Mayman suffered another injury to his leg, meaning he can't continue either. He designates the steward, Chafe, as the new leader of the group, instructing him, quote, make the trip to the island and return as quickly as possible. Mayman sleds back to camp, and he begins, once again, his recovery process. Meanwhile, the rest of his party nearly encountered disaster when they get stuck on this tiny little ice floe. I know I spelled flow wrong in the notes. They're stuck on this small ice floe. It's described as being about 15 yards by 25 yards. And during the night...
Picture it like a cartoon, like when you see the little ice break away and start drifting.
Yep.
So during the night, they're pushed closer to Herald Island, but they're not able to discern any signs that Anderson's group had actually made it there. There's not much to Herald Island. They can kind of scan the shoreline pretty thoroughly from a distance, and they're not seeing anything that indicates that Anderson's group made it there. So quoting here from Empire of Ice and Stone.
There'd not been a single trace of them. No footprints anywhere. No sled tracks, no strewn pemmican cans. Maybe they were on another part of the island. That seemed unlikely, though, since the area they scoured with binoculars appeared the only flat place that might have made it ashore. Or, Sandy could have been unable to make the crossing and had gone to Wrangel Island instead. Chaff could only draw one conclusion. I believe the poor fellows met with the same experience as ourselves, and not being as fortunate as we were to escape. They must have perished in the sea. That is like something though. So like you're looking for these people and then you get stuck on an ice floe and you're like, well, I guess if it happens to us, it could happen to them. And
Yeah.
like you could just be gone, like with no trace, basically.
And that's what's so frustrating is that in all of these situations, you're sending people out never knowing if you're going to see them again, because it's entirely possible that at any given point somebody's going to get stuck on an ice floe or is going to fall into a crack in the ice, and you will just never see them again, and there won't be any evidence left behind. There'll just be you know, patch of ice that'll freeze over and nobody will ever know that you fell through. So that is entirely possible in all of these situations, and it's a reasonable thing to assume.
That is scary. Like when they're like, there's just no signs of them. There's not even garbage. It's like to indicate they were here.
Realistically, all of these polar explorers coming into the north were treating the Arctic like their own personal garbage dump. Nobody was taking care to take everything out that they brought back in with them. There were no, camping rules in place. If you finished a can of pemmican, you just threw that can. And so there would be sort of a trail of garbage from wherever you'd pass through. So it's very reasonable to assume if there's no evidence that they were here, something tragic must have happened.
Leaving a trail of garbage through, the pristine wilderness it makes this an even more human story. It's like very representative.
Yeah, it's kind of a quintessentially, white people story, going into indigenous lands and just treating them like a giant dumpster. Yeah.
What can I extract out of you for myself, and where can I dump my garbage?
Yeah.
Wilkie must have been planning this for a while, but I walked into the bathroom and the shower curtain just explodes outward because he had just been crouched under there, I guess waiting for someone to come into the bathroom for I don't know how long, but he got me.
You made his day.
He's a very good hunter. So they would return to Shipwreck Camp again. On the way back, passing Mackay and Murray's group, they had not been having a good time so far. They've been on the ice for about 10 days at this point since leaving camp. And here Chafe learns that Morris is suffering blood poisoning from an infected knife wound on his hand. I believe he had hurt himself opening, was it a can of pemmican? A can of something.
Yeah. There are different accounts of this. And with the questions that have been raised about kind of the veracity of some of the first person accounts before, we don't know. Was it, were there different accounts of this because somebody was lying to try to make the situation appear different than it was? Or was it just sort of the natural thing that happens when two people remember something and they get details a little bit different? So some said that it was a knife wound on his hand. Others said that it was a wound from the can itself, from trying to open the pemmican. I think some said left hand, some said right hand. But either way, he definitely was wounded and he appeared to have blood poisoning. This entire scene to me is just, there's two scenes in this entire Karluk saga that really are just so haunting to think about. And this is one of them, just thinking about coming across this group of 4 essentially walking corpses, just trudging through the snow and trying to make their way and slowly dying and knowing that they're dying. And Morris, who's the youngest and the strongest, has presumably blood poisoning. He's got a wound. He's not long for this world. And then quite a ways back, you've got Beauchamp, who is really just had no business being on a trek like this regardless, who's struggling to keep up. And it's just such a haunting visual for me of these men coming through and fully knowing their fate, but refusing to turn around and refusing to go back to camp.
One thing it kind of reminds me of, and somewhat of a similar environment, is the first person accounts in The Indifferent Stars Above about the Donner Party. And you have a lot of that, of kind of these knowing glances between people of like, well, I'm not going to see that person again.
Yeah.
It is like, it does. It makes for some pretty intense reading, but also a lot of the smallest things can kill you. Like if he truly cut himself opening up a can of pemmican, like what a way to go. Like that, it's wild how high the stakes are in these situations for every little thing you do.
And as the youngest and the strongest, I'm sure that the party was relying on him to do a lot of the hauling of supplies and all of the more manual, physical elements of the work of trying to get to Wrangel Island. And so almost immediately off the bat, you've got your strongest player who's out of the game. And yeah. And also, it's not mentioned in any of the accounts. So as far as all of the kind of the popular accounts of the Karluk are concerned, none of the records made it off the ship. But according to the Cavell article and also an interview or a letter possibly that McKinley wrote later on in life, there something that Chafe had reported was that there were kind of notebooks strewn behind them as they walked. So they'd been possibly carrying the scientific records and abandoning them and letting them go as they progressed further along and could no longer carry them. And that makes me think of that Gwendolyn McEwen poem about the Franklin expedition, the one "We have now come to the end of science," just really haunting stuff.
It's very emblematic, the sort of final loss of the records, sort of an acknowledgement of what's happening here. And I think no character really plays his part as it's written better than Beauchat. In my opinion, we kind of talked the whole time of, like Beauchat probably not a great one to take with you on one of these rugged trailblazing expeditions. Sure enough, I mean, when Chafe meets this group, he doesn't even see Beauchat. Beauchat's not even with them.
No.
And they just kind of point back the way they were coming when he asks where he is. He does go off and find Beauchat. He locates him on the ice. Chafe is urging him to come back to camp, but Beauchat just waves him off and says to leave him out on the ice. His final words to Chafe are "Bon chance." That's quite a scene there with Beauchat. I mean,
yeah.
In a sense, yes, if you think of him as a character, he's playing this role quite well of what's he there for on this expedition? Well, he's there to die in a tragic, heroic way. He's accepting his fate. He's very resigned. What else is Beauchat there for but to die on the ice?
And also Mackay. I mean, you have this guy who was the agitator, who was, the loudmouth, the kind of argumentative, difficult to get along with guy who hated Bartlett and couldn't get along with a lot of the other crew. And finally, you see him just kind of plodding across the ice very slowly, knowing full well what his fate is going to be, offered the opportunity to go back, but he can't go back now. He's already burned that bridge. I mean, of course he could, but whether it was a pride thing or whether it was just, irreconcilable differences with Bartlett and the rest of the crew, he couldn't go back. So he kept on going, and that was the last that he was ever heard from.
That is, I think you were probably talking about this when you had read the quote about the idea that in many of these cases, the ice is just opening up and swallowing people. A lead can open and then you're just, there is no trace that you were ever here. There's something that happens with a lot of these stories where whether it's people literally disappearing or a lot of these are so heavily documented with journals and one day the journal just stops. And there's very dramatic endings to all of these. Let's see. So back at Shipwreck Camp, Bartlett is organizing the rest into 4 parties of 4-ish. I think one of the groups is bigger. Each party is equipped with 1 sled and 5 dogs. They did have 22 total left, but 2 of them were too injured to continue. In the life of a sled dog at this time, that means these 2 dogs were shot and used to feed the other dogs. Similar fate. I don't know if they were also used as food, but of course, Molly has this litter of puppies that she's had. Those are not going to be able to make the trip. They are, as Jess was talking about earlier, they're consuming food and they're not providing anything back in the sledding department. So those are not going to be able to make the trip. Hadley has the task of killing those puppies. The cat, though, the cat is allowed to come. The cat is the mascot. The cat is the moral support. The cat has to go.
Yeah, and Fred Maurer and Hadley actually sew together a little deerskin bag to carry the cat
Yes.
around in. So, I think we could all use a little uplift after reading about, hearing about the dogs. So the cat, they sew a little deerskin bag for the cat, and Fred Maurer would kind of put the bag over his neck and put the cat in the bag and kind of carry her close to his chest and kind of keep her warm with body heat and stuff. So even though it was a rough place for sled dogs, cats historically have done better than dogs in the Arctic, and usually it's because a cat isn't going to eat nearly as much as a sled dog, so you can just feed the cat a slice or two of pemmican here or there. The cat can eat scraps, so it's not as heavy of a burden on the stores to take the cat with you. And at this point, everybody is emotionally invested in the cat's survival. That's their mascot. They are going to protect her at all costs. So they do take the cat with them the entire time and protect her like she was their baby.
If this was a series, the discourse on Twitter, you'd have the hashtag like, if Nikki dies, we riot.
Yes. Yes. And so I think that the cat was very much just a symbol of hope to them. If we can keep this thing alive, then we might just be okay. So that was something that really was a motivating factor for the men too. We have to stay alive and we have to keep it together for Nikki.
Mm-hmm. 2 teams departed on February 19th. They were instructed to head directly for Wrangel Island. So these teams were Hadley, Williamson, Breddy, and Maurer. And then the other group here was Monroe, Malach, Clam, and Chafe. When the M's start to get more split up, it's a little easier to keep them straight.
Yeah, and unfortunately, with the removal of 2 smaller parties, there are now fewer M's and fewer Scots to keep track of. So the M names and the Scots get a little easier to manage from this point on because a lot of them are dead.
So the following day, the rest of the teams would set out. This was a team of Bartlett, McKinley, Mayman, and Kadaktovic. And then we have Templeman, Karluk, Kiruk, Helen, and Mugpi as the final group. These teams would head first for Herald Island to check for signs of the others, and then on to Wrangel to rejoin the group. They keep on holding out hope for Herald Island, and they
really do.
It never comes out. Bartlett estimates that this party covered 12 miles the first day and 18 the second. McKinley and Kadaktovic make a successful supply run back to Shipwreck Camp. On February 28th, the Bartlett and Templeman parties caught up with those that had left a day earlier, but they're heading back the opposite way, and they say there's no way through these jagged mountains of ice. After surveying for himself, Bartlett decides that there is a way that they're going to do this, and they are literally going to go through. Instead of, they could have to travel, hundreds of miles to find a way around this. So he is going to try to punch directly through these ice ridges or mountains, really, at this point.
And this is such a Bob Bartlett thing to do. Just, we can't find a way around, so we're going to go right through. And
I feel like we've all had bosses like that before.
Yeah, but I think that this is where Bartlett's sort of like fit-we ball approach to kind of ice navigation and ice piloting comes through. Like, we can't get around it, so we're just going to go right through it. And it's it ends up being a good move, but I can see how the men would be like, we're going to what? We're going to cut through all this? Excuse me?
And it does seem like such a huge task, but also at the same time, it's like for so much of these stories, one of the hugest variables is where do we go? And whereas here, they know exactly where they need to get to. So it's like taking that variable off the board is huge. Even if you do have to do a ton of work to get there, you at least know where you have to get to. A little outline of Bartlett's goal here. He wants to cut a path of about 4 feet wide, enough to get these loaded sleds through. And just for a little temperature check, because we know it's cold, but it is down to around negative 55 around this time, which I think in Celsius is probably like negative 45, if I had to guess.
That sounds right.
Minus 55 Fahrenheit. It's negative 48 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
For our Celsius users. So McKinley, Hadley, and Chafe make another run back to Shipwreck Camp. They load up 2 sleds with pemmican and fuel. Here, they get some excitement. We have kind of seen wildlife off and on, most of it in the form of seals and phantom caribou. But here they have an encounter with that other thing that lives in the Arctic, the polar bear. Multiple polar bears, in fact.
Yeah.
This is a fun, I'm sure not fun at the time, but fun to read about example here. So what happens with the polar bears?
A thing to know about Wrangel Island is even today, if you go to Wrangel Island, which first of all, it's incredibly different to go to Wrangel Island because it is part of Russia, and I believe there's some kind of military base there. But even if you go to Wrangel Island today, it is known for just having tons and tons of polar bears. That's one of the things that Wrangel Island is known for. So you have the entire area around Wrangel Island, when it's frozen over, there's going to be tons of polar bears, and they're going to be hungry and they're going to be looking for food. So we've got McKinley, Hadley, and Chafe who are trying to make this supply run, and they've got this sledge loaded down with pemmican and supplies, and they've got their rifles on the sledge. And then they come across these 3 polar bears, and one of them somehow gets between them and their sledge. So they're not able to make the run for their rifles right away. So they just start yelling. And they yell at the polar bear, trying to scare it off. And it works to some extent. It works at least to get the one polar bear out of the path of their sledge. They are able to get their rifles, and they shoot and kill all 3 polar bears. And then the next day, they're able to come back and retrieve all that very valuable polar bear meat. So that was definitely a welcome thing to have polar bear meat. But polar bears are definitely, the apex predators of the Arctic. That must have been a terrifying experience. And they're very, very lucky because that could have ended very differently.
I think because you usually see, if you see a polar bear, for, someone like us, if you see a polar bear, it is probably at the zoo, and it is probably standing next to other polar bears. And so it's hard to get a scale of how massive polar bears are. They describe one of these bears as being about 12 feet long.
Yeah.
Which is insane. Like, polar bears are enormous.
Yeah, they are.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is that these polar bears, it's winter. These polar bears are not having a lot of luck probably finding food either, because there are only small animals and things on Wrangel Island in the summer season. So these are hungry, angry polar bears, and it is a miracle that yelling at them made them go away.
Yeah, they very quickly almost became a supply run for the polar bears.
Yes.
Also, fun fact here that I think I first maybe encountered reading about Terror and Erebus is that you can eat much of the polar bear, but not the liver.
Yes.
Because if you eat the liver, you'll get like acute vitamin A poisoning.
Yep, there is so much vitamin A in polar bear liver that it will kill you. And this is something that polar explorers learned through hard experience. They definitely learned that on the job, that you cannot eat polar bear livers.
Much as you might want to.
When you're starving, they were eating every part of the animal, but they at least had the knowledge not to eat the livers.
And if I remember correctly, that's because they eat basically only seal, and that just concentrates it in their liver.
Mm-hmm.
They're the liver king, basically.
The liver king.
I guess lesson learned, we try to draw lessons from these stories. Lesson learned here is you can't eat polar bear liver.
Don't do it.
As a human.
Polar bear liver, not even once.
When you get to college, people are going to be offering you polar bear liver. And it's your job as a responsible member of the community not to accept it. And not to let your friends accept it either.
This is your brain. This is your brain on polar bear liver.
The kids are calling it taking the L.
Let's see, they got through the ice ridges on March 6th. And on March 12th, they reached land for the first time in about 8 months. But Bartlett knows that this is not the end of the story. This is really just step 1. Quoting here from Empire of Ice and Stone.
He was struck by the sobering thought that not a single soul in the outside world had any idea that they were here, 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And unless he could tell someone, no one was coming for them.
Yeah, this is like not a part of the world where you can just light a fire on shore and hope a passing ship sees you. Hope you brought your cosmetic mirror and you can reflect the light. That's not really going to help because ships don't really come up here with frequency.
No.
Because why would they?
Yeah, this is not a great place to be to be stranded.
Even if they wanted to come up there during the majority of the year, there is too much ice. There's only a very narrow window during which a ship could even get close to Wrangel Island. So if you're up there and nobody knows you're up there, you will stay up there.
Bartlett's plan is not to have everyone stay in one big camp. I think in the part 1, we talked about the issues of scaling up these survivalist strategies in the Arctic, saying if it's just you, great. If it's you and 5 other people, you're probably fine. Here, we have a fairly large group, so they're going to have to spread out. This is close enough for mutual support. They're about 10 to 15 miles apart. But with a wider range, they have a better chance of getting whatever little game they might find on Wrangel Island. But assessing this situation realistically, the island is not going to be their long-term solution. We said there's very little chance that a ship is going to happen to pass them by. Bartlett determines that going for help is the only solution. So he chooses Kadaktovik as a traveling companion. And he's got a pretty simple plan. He wants to make straight for the Siberian coast, get into contact with local indigenous groups, who could then hopefully direct or escort them east until they get to a point where he can take a ship for Alaska and organize a rescue. Kind of like running a marathon, simple but difficult.
Yes.
Concept is not hard. You simply have to do this. But this is going to be quite a slog.
I just quickly in Google here went from the southwestern tip of Wrangel Island to the mainland, and I'm coming up with about 90 miles.
They're having to cross that over the ice.
Well, not to mention, like, that's just the part of Wrangel Island that's closest. Like, even traversing the island can't be easy. It's rough. That's really rough terrain. And there's bears.
I think I include that here in a bit. But yeah, they will, travel around the perimeter of the island, and then you sort of hop off the southwestern tip.
And in order to truly get help, Bartlett was not just going to have to get to the very tip of Siberia. He was going to have to get to a whaling station or a place where they had a telegraph or some kind of mechanism for getting word out to other people that, hey, we're trapped on Wrangel Island. So it's not just, okay, we made it to Siberia, we're done. Like, he's got to get inland too.
This reminded me of the Shackleton, like with the Endurance, this whole process of surviving this trip back to somewhere you can get help. And then the process of, now we have to go get all of the people. And this occurred to me as I was doing this one. The Endurance is right around the same time period, correct? As this is happening?
Endurance is a couple years after. So we're in 1914 here. The Karluk set out in 1913. Endurance, I believe, sets out in 1915.
Okay, that's later than I thought it was.
Yeah, it's a little bit later. Let me double check that, just make sure I'm not making it up.
The people will be howling if this is.
They will.
Sometimes they do.
Okay.
I don't know. We say that about like people being very nitpicky, but I've found that of the fandoms, the Arctic and Antarctic fandoms are the most enthusiastic without being like snobby about it. Like they're very everyone's very very excited to share their their interest and their expertise on things.
Okay, I'm glad I checked because Endurance sets out on August 8th of 1914, so it's a little earlier than I thought. So when Endurance set out, World War I was starting to kick off a little bit, and so they had to get clearance from Churchill, who was Secretary of the Navy at the time, in order to actually set out on the expedition. So that is sort of contextualizes that in time too. So, they were setting out after the war had already kind of gotten started, and when they were starting to wonder, like, should we be taking a ship full of young men into Antarctica at a time when we're getting ready to go to war?
They shouldn't be dying in the ice. They should be dying in the mud.
Exactly. They need to die in the trenches, not in the mud, not in the ice.
I can't help but imagine like a young, I don't know, Belgian ensign named Josh Altnet declaring, I think World War I just started at the Battle of the Frontiers. All right, so in the absence of Bartlett, Monroe would be designated as the overall leader of the island, though he would camp with Clam and Bredy. Chafe, Williamson, and Maurer formed another group, Templeman, Mayman, Malek, and McKinley. were another, and then Karluk and his family plus Hadley were the final group.
And this was not something that Bartlett was super enthusiastic about. He did not have a lot of confidence in Monroe as a leader. And whether this is, because of his things that he'd observed or whether because he and Monroe had had tension before, I'm not sure. But the people that he trusted the most, of course, were going to be McKinley and Mayman. But at this point, at least, he decides that it would not be proper to put junior scientists in charge of ship's crew. And since Monroe was the ranking officer, he was put in charge of the crew. Interesting how that did not work with the shore party, but it did work here.
And Monroe, he's the chief engineer, correct?
He is the chief engineer, yes.
He's a fairly senior officer, that
he is
being put in charge here. Even if that's not probably what he wanted as his job, having to manage all of these people.
No, I don't imagine that that's a thing that he yearned for. He was, by all accounts, just sort of an engines guy. Didn't really want to deal with the people. Would rather deal with the engines.
Just think of this group as an engine, and all of the pieces have to work together, and they have to glide. They have to be there can't be friction. So we gotta just think of this the right way.
Could say he signed up to manage engines, not ensigns.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
yeah. But McKinley and Mayman were, of course, Bartlett's kind of very special boys. So he wanted them to at least have, his official stamp of approval of unofficial leadership. But legally, on paper at least, Monroe was in charge. And he issued written letters to everybody, just kind of informing them of what he wanted them to do in his absence and what his orders were during the time that he was gone. So, and we do have those. We do have at least some of those letters that have survived.
Just defusing tension by leaving a conflicting series of notes, making everyone think that they're someone else's boss and someone else's subordinate, and so no one really knows.
Yeah.
It's a very Michael Scott plan.
Let's see. So there's a note here. This is sort of interjected as a small little vignette in the overall story, but Stefansson, again, he's off doing stuff. He's not doing nothing. He's on his new adventure. We went into some of those tensions with him trying to get a new ship and new crew last episode. But he is off, and he does end up making it to Herschel Island, correct? Because this is where his secret family is?
I don't remember if it's Herschel Island or where exactly it is. I don't think it's Herschel Island, but I don't remember off the top of my head where it is.
Somewhere.
He is somewhere up in the high Arctic. And in the least surprising thing that you will learn about Stefansson today, he had a secret family. This was not terribly uncommon. Whenever you have groups of white men going into the Arctic, there are indigenous women up there, and so it's very it's not uncommon for them to have relationships with indigenous women that sometimes result in children. And of course, the children are going to be half European and half indigenous, which makes the whole idea of, the copper Inuit and the blonde Inuit even more laughable, because there are constantly, children being produced from relationships of indigenous women and white men. And that has been happening as long as there have been white men coming to the Arctic. So Stefansson is no exception. He, when he was up in the Arctic before the Karluk expedition, he was, I don't remember exactly when, but it had been quite some time. He'd been up in the Arctic as part of a smaller expedition, and he had taken up with a woman by the name of Karluk, and she was age appropriate for him. She was a widow. Unfortunately, a lot of the relationships with indigenous women tended towards older white men with very, very young women. And also, unfortunately, as we'll see maybe later in life, Steph's tastes tend to run towards younger women. But Karluk was an age-appropriate choice of partner for him. And so they were together during his entire previous expedition. And she was one of the people who was helping to kind of translate some of the language for him and kind of translate some of the cultural practices and help him understand sort of the indigenous way of life up there. So she was a very valuable part of this previous expedition that he was on. And they were together so long that she was his common law wife, and they did have a child together, and his name was Alex. So in typical Steph fashion, he had spent all this time with Panagabluk, and they'd had their son Alex, and then he had departed the Arctic and did not come back for years and years and years. So when he finally gets back up there and meets up with Panagabluk, she is very, very angry at him. She is unhappy because, you said you were coming back, you left me with this child, and so he tries to kind of smooth things over. But yeah, he had not told anybody in his life down in the United States and in Canada about his relationship with Panagabluk and about his child. He just sort of left them. And then he comes back and he tries to, get back together with her and rekindle things. And I'm not entirely sure how that went, but I know that he did very much the same thing where they were together for a while and then he took off and was never seen again. And I don't believe he ever did see Panagabluk again after he left this most recent time. And I don't believe he ever really had a relationship with his son, Alex. There is a story that is just very sad. His son, Alex, really wanted to see him at some point, or really wanted to meet up with him, I guess. And instead of doing that, Steph sent him a copy of his most recent book. So
that's like a super villain origin story.
He is Father of the Year material for sure. So that's what Steph's doing up in the Arctic.
That whole time I was sort of having some sort of, daydream reverie of like Family Feud and being like, what's the problem with my polar exploration captain? And it's like, show me secret family. And
the secret family was so common. It was extremely common. At least Steph had the decency to not be married to somebody else while he had the secret family. That was not the case with Peary or with Matthew Henson or with any of the other men who took indigenous women and had children with them.
The internet really ruined the secret family game.
Yeah. You just can't have a secret family anymore. It's so much harder. You got to put so much more work into it.
Yeah, it's so much more work to have your secret family in 2025.
Millennials are killing the secret family.
Yeah. First Applebee's and now the secret family industry.
Oh, and I was flipping through Empire of Ice and Stone. In chapter 22, Searching for Crocker Land, it does mention, so they are at Collinson Point, Alaska, but it does mention Stefansson had gone to Herschel Island, retrieved his wife and son, spent thousands.
Okay, they were on Herschel Island.
They were there, but
Herschel, not Harold. Okay, that makes sense. Yes,
Herschel. Yes, I may have said Harold. I don't know why. How they would have gotten there, I don't know.
Too many H names, too many M names. It's all understandable.
Back at camp, Bartlett and Kadektovik are readying for their journey to the mainland. And on March 17th, because of a break in the weather, Bartlett decides on another supply run back to Shipwreck Camp for Monroe, Bredy, and Clam. The next day, the 18th, Bartlett and Kadektovik left on their journey to the mainland, with Bartlett leaving written instructions for Monroe when he returned. So here we have an issue of health, fitness, nutrition, all of those things coming to a head. We've got injuries that can't really be treated as well as they should. We have things like gangrene that is a possibility from any little injury you might suffer if you accidentally cut yourself with a knife or a pemmican tin. It's going to be very hard to heal. So there's this sickness that seems to be spreading, and they're not quite sure what it is. It isn't scurvy because it doesn't have scorbutic symptoms, but they're not quite sure what it is. Is there any insight that we have into what was the problem here, Jess?
Yeah, now we do. At the time, they had no idea what it was because they were familiar with scurvy, with the symptoms of scurvy, and the symptoms that they were experiencing were not scurvy. They didn't have, black lines on their gums. They weren't bleeding from the gums. Their sores and cuts and things weren't reopening, so they didn't think it was scurvy, but they were extremely tired and extremely weak. And they noticed that the people who had this disease had really grotesque swelling of their limbs. So like you've got young athletic people for the most part, and their legs are just absolutely, swollen to the point that they're having trouble moving and walking. So they're trying to figure out what could this illness be. They do, at least in McKinley's diary, he does kind of make a connection between this illness that they're experiencing and one of the types of pemmican that they brought. They brought two types. They brought the I don't remember the first kind, but Underwood was the one that they did not like. And they noticed that whenever they ate this pemmican, first of all, it just tasted off to them. It tasted wrong, and it kind of made them sick whenever they ate it. And they noticed that the men who were eating the Underwood pemmican, there was maybe a correlation between that and the swelling limbs disease. So McKinley kind of formulates this theory that maybe it's actually this pemmican that's making us sick. Maybe it is not nutritionally sound. Now, this pemmican had been tested for purity, so we knew that it didn't have, metal fragments or anything in it. But it hadn't really been tested for nutritional balance. So it's very possible that the pemmican that they were eating had too much fat, too much carbohydrate, too much something, and that their body wasn't getting what they needed out of it. Because pemmican is a survival food, and it has to be very strictly formulated so that they're assuming that this is pretty much all you're going to be eating. So you have to get everything that your body needs in order to function from the pemmican. And if you're not getting the things that you need to function from the pemmican, things are going to start to go wrong. So McKinley has this idea that the pemmican is making them sick, and he's maybe right about that. This is one of the things where we have sources. The source from, not to spoil anything, but after the rescue, the doctor on the ship says, this is nephritis. Your kidneys are shutting down. So he argues that this is something that could be a result of improper nutritional balance in the pemmican. It could be a result of just a starvation diet. There could be a lot of different things that cause nephritis, but certainly the pemmican is a possibility. I have actually corresponded with a doctor and a polar head, and he didn't give me the okay to talk about this publicly, so I don't want to say his name or anything, but he has speculated that it could actually be beriberi instead of nephritis, that the symptoms line up with that too. So could be nephritis, could be beriberi, could be something that we don't know yet. Without the ability to dig up bodies and do autopsies and do testing, we probably will never know. But the symptoms are such that it could have definitely been nephritis. It could have definitely been beriberi.
Boss, there's something off with this pemmican, and we got all the glass out of it.
And this is another situation where, for all of his many faults as a human being, Peary was very meticulous about making sure that he was involved in every step of the process for, from pemmican production to overseeing all of the supplies and everything. This would not have happened on a Peary expedition. But Steph was a little less careful. And again, Dr. Anderson did have it tested for obvious impurities, but there could still be a nutritional imbalance. And when you are on a frozen rock in the middle of the Arctic Ocean and pretty much all you're eating is pemmican, that pemmican needs to have all of the nutrients that you need to survive, or something's going to start shutting down. And so it's very possible that there was a problem with the pemmican. But I have a friend who's a doctor who actually pointed out that you wouldn't necessarily need nutritionally imbalanced pemmican. You could get nephritis just from existing on a starvation diet. Even if the pemmican was okay, if you're not eating enough of it and you're starving, that can also cause your kidneys to shut down. There are a lot of things that can make the body go haywire in a starvation situation.
I feel like you can't really talk about that stuff, especially right now, without mentioning the situation in Gaza. This is one of those things that comes up sometimes where you have your people saying like, oh, well, this isn't genocide. These people are dying from kidney disease. Because that's what happens when you put someone on a starvation diet. The body starts to shut down. These imbalances get worse and worse. And not everything looks the same in terms of why people are dying here, but it can all be tied back to this meager starvation diet that they're on.
Absolutely. And I think that, maybe hearing about this other starvation situation will maybe help raise awareness to people about the situation in Gaza. I'm not sure, but I certainly hope that would be the case.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens when it happens to white people. Maybe that'll get people to worry about it.
And spoiler alert, it does not go well for the white people.
So settling in at Wrangel Island, there was an interesting quote here from Chafe, because we've kind of talked about this. We talked about this with the presence of the cat on board, how that's a big morale boost, and it sort of makes a surreal, brutal situation just seem a bit more tolerable.
Mm-hmm.
This quote from Chafe has to do with the fact that, oh yeah, there's children here also. There's very young children who are in this survival situation as well. And this quote from his journal reads, "The presence of the little children created a sort of domestic influence on our frigid quarters. Their play and prattle gave courage to the men and helped us to forget the dangers that were daily surrounding us." So yeah, I mean, if you're going into the Arctic, maybe bring a kid. Maybe that would help you.
Maybe.
Bringing it back to like the Donner Party stuff and the Indifferent Stars Above, it's sort of the same thing there, that it kind of gives you a purpose in your day to day. It brings a little more humanity into the situation of, well, I guess I have to take care of these people that can't take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely gives you like a little bit more of a reason to go.
And when you're in a situation that's just all misery all the time, sometimes just having a little something to look forward to can be the thing that makes you get up in the morning instead of just giving up hope and giving up. So you're surrounded by illness and just suffering and misery, but hey, there's these kids and they're pretty cute. And there's this cat and the cat's pretty cute. And sometimes, the human psyche is weird. And sometimes we can survive just horrific things and horrific situations if we have just a little something to give us hope, a little something to look forward to, and to make our existence bearable. So I think that the kids and the cat were definitely a major part of why there were any survivors of this.
Basically, the plot of the movie Life is Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So there is I was sort of mixed up and didn't get into the details of it, but there's an instance where Chafe is out on the ice with a few other of the men. They end up getting separated, and Chafe ends up basically entirely snowblind from being out on the ice.
Mm-hmm.
And Molly, who is out there with him, who is stranded with him, he's got a lead or a rope tied to her, and she leads him back to camp successfully, just sort of dragging him through.
She does.
So Molly really showing her mettle here.
She is the hero dog of this expedition for sure. So snow blindness was a very big problem in this expedition, and is a very big problem in a lot of polar expeditions, just because imagine the worst sunburn that you've ever had, and then imagine that on your eyeballs. That is what snow blindness is like. It is from staring at just constant, bright, white, glistening snow, especially as you get into the summer months in the Arctic, where it's bright pretty much all the time. So this was an extremely painful condition, and one that would just absolutely knock you out. You were blinded by snow blindness. You could not really open your eyes. You couldn't do anything except wait for it to pass. And it was extremely painful. And fun fact, one of the ways that they treated snow blindness was with eyeball cocaine. So
yes.
You would put, so eyeball, I've been hoping that I would get to talk about eyeball cocaine. So you would make a tincture of cocaine, and you would use it to kind of numb the eyes so that you could open and close your eyes, at least without excruciating pain. And apparently, according to a friend who's a paramedic, some old school doctors will still sometimes use cocaine for eye injuries. So it is a legitimate medical application of cocaine in these situations.
So we're talking like an eyedropper, right?
Either an eyedropper or, unfortunately, sometimes a syringe. Sorry.
Them eye injections.
Eyeball cocaine injections. So yeah, but consider that was less painful than the snow blindness. So that's how bad the snow blindness was. But Chafe is out on the ice by himself. He doesn't have any eyeball cocaine. It's just him. And so here comes Molly, and she is able to lead him successfully back to camp because he can barely open his eyes. So if you don't have somebody to lead you, you are going to almost immediately fall off an ice floe and drown and never be seen or heard from again. But Molly, the hero dog that she was able to successfully guide him through the ice and back to shore camp, where they were able to, I assume, administer some eyeball cocaine and get him some relief for his snow blindness.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a shot of eyeball cocaine sounds like something someone would say if they were making fun of this era of medicine.
Yeah.
It's like too ridiculous to be real, but it's there. It's there.
If you're interested in medicinal cocaine during this era, there is a show called The Nick that gets into it in some pretty interesting detail. So I highly recommend that. For eyeball cocaine enthusiasts out there, you know who you are.
That does kind of lead us into some of the medical care going on here. So each of these attempts to, get back to shipwreck camp for some more supplies, if these don't go well, this can quickly go very, very, very badly. And because of one of these unsuccessful attempts to reach shipwreck camp, Clam finds that his left big toe is not long for this world. He's gotten, I believe, severely frostbitten.
Mm-hmm.
/ gangrenous? Or is that just from the cutting here?
No, it had started to go gangrenous, I think. So they have a situation where you've got a gangrenous frostbitten toe, and you don't have a doctor because your doctor is dead. And also, I don't know that I mentioned this earlier, but we talked about in episode 2 about Dr. Mackay dipping into the medicinal drugs and alcohol in the medical kit for his own purposes. So I am unsure actually how much of the medical supplies are left at this point and how much they would have in terms of things like, cocaine or opiates or other painkillers. So Clam is in this unfortunate situation where he knows this toe needs to be amputated and the doctor is gone. So who is going to amputate your toe? Well, we get second engineer Williamson, who seems to have somehow developed a knack for some of the medical stuff. He's not a doctor certainly, but he seems to have gotten a little better and he's a little more comfortable, at least, with it than some of the other men. So they get a pair of tin shears and they hold Clam down and they amputate his toe. And Clam, true to his nickname, does not cry out or make a sound as they cut his rotten toe off.
And I guess that is the thing, partially not saying this would feel good, but I guess the fact that it is so thoroughly frostbitten and gangrenous that you legitimately might not feel it as much.
There's a scene like this in The Terror, too, where they're cutting off the frostbitten toes of the men who, I don't know how much sensation you would have left in your toe at this time. I can't imagine it was pleasant, but it might not be as horrifically painful as having a toe amputated that was not frostbitten.
Like getting local anesthesia for a dental thing. It's not really the pain. It's the wrenching and pulling that probably also isn't fun.
Mm-hmm. And just the knowledge of what's happening to your body.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't want to watch that.
No.
And it's mentioned, these are tin shears. They've been cutting metal, so they're not super sharp.
No, it was not ideal medical equipment there for sure.
All right, so I made a note here about Skeleton Island is mentioned a couple times here as sort of a waypoint. As the name would imply, it doesn't sound very hospitable.
No.
And so I was a bit confused. I was getting lost in the details of this. But at one point, Mayman leaves a note here for McKinley, sort of updating him on his next move.
I'm leaving this place for Rogers Harbor, or any other place on the coast suitable. If you should happen to arrive here in the meantime, do not stay here, but get down to the coast as soon as you can. Take with you all you can carry. We have had hard times all the time. No game. Illness have we all had. And I feel very weak yet. The best regards from Bob and Malik. Yours truly, Bjarne Mayman.
Did you have something you were going to add to that, Jess, or no?
Just that there were so many parties going back and forth that when you got to a place that was not a particularly good place to be. It made sense that Mayman would leave a note for McKinley or for anyone else who would come there, just that this is not a particularly good place to set up camp, because at this point we've got people going back and forth to Shipwreck Camp hauling supplies. We've got smaller parties kind of fracturing off. And if you knew that this was not going to be a good place for hunting or fishing or finding food, then there was no point in staying there. So I think the note was mostly just to kind of warn people off from that. And if you go down the coast a little bit, Rogers Harbor, we do have several groups of people that kind of went in and out of Rogers Harbor. So I think it was mostly just to let people know this is not the place. Keep going.
Around this point, we have a classic Mayman line from his journal where he writes, "I don't know how this will end. The prospects are certainly not bright."
Yeah.
Bummer, but how can you blame him really at this point?
He's not wrong. It's not looking good for our boys.
Switching back to Bartlett and Kadaktovik, they reached the southwest tip of Wrangel Island, so the closest point to the mainland, on March 23rd. They had gone along the shoreline so they could check in to see if they could see anything from Herald Island, and again, that there's nothing there. There's no one there. They cross the ice, and they make for the Siberian mainland. So a little quote here from the Ice Master.
"It was lane after lane of open water and uncooperative ice, and it slowed down their journey immensely. So many times the sled plunged through the young ice, soaking various provisions, including their sleeping gear. Whenever that happened, the dogs would huddle, terrified in a pack, which was too much weight for the fragile ice beneath them. Bartlett was taxed, calling on all the experience he had ever gleaned as a Newfoundland sealer and an Arctic explorer."
In part 2, we talked a bit about how some of the most successful explorers here are the Norwegians, because they're good at letting the terrain dictate their choices and the technology they choose to bring with them into the Arctic. The way that they design ships, for example. And we saw that with humans trying to have to learn the rules of this new environment. And it's kind of interesting here to see it with dogs. Having, yes, these are sled dogs bred for these conditions, but at the same time, they still also have things where their instinct sort of backfires on them in the Arctic. These dogs, they have this instinct to huddle together for safety, and this is what actually causes the ice to break. And then you got to get them out of the ice. So everyone's learning how to survive in these areas. So as they push across the open ice and closer to land, here we kind of get back into what we talked about with, like, most histories are human versus human rather than human versus nature. And we actually get back to that here with Kadaktovik. He expresses some fear, some concern about what if they actually do meet Siberian natives. He has not heard good things from his people about the response to when stories about Alaska natives landing in Siberia and being killed because they're different. They're a different tribe speaking a different language. So he's very concerned that they will see him and recognize him as an Alaska native and kill him. So crossing onto land ice, they reach land itself on April 4th, 1914. This is later established that they came ashore about 60 miles northwest of Cape Schmidt. They are welcomed, maybe to Kadaktovik's surprise, by the Siberian natives. These are Chukchi tribes that live up here.
The Chukchi people were incredibly welcoming and hospitable to Bartlett and to Kadaktovik. And this, I know, was a surprise to Kadaktovik because of the stories that he heard growing up. But I think that Bartlett was not surprised by this because he had encountered these people before, and he'd always knew them to be, friendly and helpful people. So Bartlett was not surprised, but Kadaktovik was very surprised. And were it not for, the kindness of these people, Bartlett and Kadaktovik would not have been able to make this journey.
And so there's some attempts at communication. There's very little intelligibility here with Kadaktovik's language. They do, however, meet two Russians here. After they're taken east by a Chukchi guide, they reach Cape North. They meet a few interesting people here. Two of these are Russians, both of whom speak at least a little bit of English. They also meet a native man who does speak some of Kadektovik's language. And we've actually gotten some recent input here. Did this come from Kay also?
It did come from Kay, yes.
So a bit more sort of verification. We had some questions about what languages we're dealing with here. Kadektovik's language has been identified most likely as a North Slope dialect of Northern Alaskan Inupiaq. And so I think we had mentioned that or Inuktitut in the last episode. So this comes from Kay, who we should credit as a sort of eminence grise for this.
Kay is incredibly knowledgeable about indigenous languages and just sort of the indigenous side of the history that I am certainly not as knowledgeable about. So they are definitely kind of my counterpart in being insane about this story. And but they tend to be more knowledgeable about sort of the Inuit and indigenous side of things.
Thank you, Kay.
Thank you, Kay.
So one of these Russians, this is a Mr. Karayev. Although it's written like most like older English sources, it's written less popular now. His name is written Karaief. Using the double F is like a very retro thing. I feel like with English transliterations of Russian names, now it's much more common to see EV instead of EFF. This Mr. Karayev, I was interested in because it's not a Russian name I had heard before. So I went onto like a Russian genealogy website, and I was looking for this name Karayev. It's a name that's mostly found in North Ossetia, actually, is sort of North Ossetia, Dagestan, kind of the Chechnya area, southern parts of European Russia. So I was kind of just curious about this guy and what brought him all the way out here. What kinds of Russians are going out to, northern Siberia to live with the Chukchi? So Karayev has a nice cozy little house they spend the night in. And he says he has a brother in East Cape who can help. He gives a little letter of introduction, vouching for them. On April 9th, they leave North Cape. There's a little saga here where something as simple as buying another sled dog is sort of impossible because these are hot commodities. People need their sled dogs. Up here, there's not really a lot of people who are willing to sell. Ultimately, I believe he does come across a father and son who have a sled dog that he wants to buy. A little reluctant at first, but then he offers them his Colt 45, his revolver. So he offers them this. They discuss, they test it out, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is pretty cool." So they trade dog for gun.
Mm-hmm. And they name the dog Colt.
Yeah, Americans could probably try swapping out guns for dogs. I think would be a good thing. Two things that are way too prevalent in public spaces in America: dogs and guns. So we do this. Colt really wants to go back home. Colt does not understand that he has been traded, that another team has picked up his contract. So he keeps on trying to run home. I think twice he escapes and he tries to run home.
Yeah.
This leads to some mild to intermediate animal abuse where he ends up just like tying his jaw shut overnight so he can't chew off his lead.
Yeah.
Anyway, he goes back one final time and his original owner like sleds back with him and brings him back. And that, I guess, convinces the dog, okay, I'm supposed to be here. My owner wants me to be here with these people. Another kind of funny little bit of comedic break here. Throughout their journey, I think this happens multiple times where they're offered seal and walrus meat. Bartlett, he's much more of a seal guy. He's not really feeling the walrus meat. It could be a bit aged for his preferences, but Kadektovik loves it. He is just chowing down like this is a delicacy. He's like, oh, this is great. I'm so glad that they have a bowl of walrus meat. If that's not something you grew up eating, it's probably not going to hit for you, much like Skyline chili.
I did not grow up eating Skyline chili, but I love Skyline chili. So I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. But
that is a very rare thing, in my opinion. Like most people who try it as an adult, I feel like don't like it, or just don't get it, or just don't appreciate it, maybe. So their Chukchi guide, he kind of abandons them. He says he'll take them. I think he says he'll take them all the way there for $40. And he ends up dipping out. He says, I actually have to get back home. So Bartlett yells at him. He gives him $5 instead.
All of this information is coming from I know it was reproduced in Empire and in The Ice Master from Bartlett's actual book about the crossing. And if you get a chance, definitely check out Bartlett's book about the sinking of the Karluk and about his journey with Kadiktovik, because it is so funny. Bartlett is a very, very funny writer, or his ghostwriter is. But whoever wrote the book has a lot of very funny stories about, I wanted to prove to this guy that my word was worth something. So even though he didn't fulfill his end of the bargain, I still begrudgingly took $5 out of my wallet and paid him. And just little narratives like that are really funny and really worth your time to read or to listen to the audiobook. It's also an audiobook.
Yeah, this on its own, this kind of little, just smaller story inside the story of them and the people they encounter and the bartering they have to do. One of my favorite characters is coming up here. So after a few days, they arrive at the home of an American. I believe he was a naturalized Norwegian, but he was an American citizen, a Mr. Olson. He hires them a driver and a dog team to get them closer to East Cape. And the guy they're going to be traveling with is a guy named Corrigan, who is not a white guy, despite the name, despite what Bartlett's expecting. Mm-hmm. He is, quote, the best known hunter in Siberia. Bartlett notes he was by far the most prosperous native I had met. This guy's really interesting. I want to know more about Corrigan. I want to know his whole life story. 3-season Netflix series. Quoting here from The Ice Master.
Corrigan knew very little English, which frustrated him immensely because he wanted to tell Bartlett stories of his exploits. He was a hero, the daredevil of northern Siberia, and he was proud of his conquests.
He had heard all about Bartlett's adventures from the Norwegian, and he grew more and more animated as he related stories about his own narrow escapes and great hunts. Bartlett could pick up a word here and there, but the more excited Corrigan grew, the less the captain could understand him.
Soon he was just nodding at everything the hunter said, until Corrigan realized that Bartlett had no idea what he was saying. Grabbing his head in despair, the great hunter moved onward in frustration, driving the sled fast and hard over the ice.
As an English teacher, sometimes with students who are at very low level, I definitely appreciate the feeling of saying something really cool that you really want to get out and phrasing it in a really interesting way, and then realizing no one has understood what I've been talking about for 5 minutes. Yeah, I feel some of Corrigan's pain here. This would be a great scene in the movie of him just like relating this long tale, acting these things out, and realizing that Bartlett has understood like 4 words, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
He's a character. So ultimately on April 24th, after traveling for 39 days, over 700 miles, they reached East Cape and the settlement there called Emma Town, where they would find the brother of Mr. Karayev.
The brothers Karayev?
The brothers Karayev. Karayev. Yeah, I think the stress is on the So that's the end of the notes for part 3. So another big chunk down for part 3. Do we have any final thoughts before we wrap this section of the story? Anything else we need to squeeze in here?
I think we're at a good stopping point, Bartlett getting to Emma Town.
Well, we can wrap things there. Part 4 will be the conclusion of the main sequence of the story. We will wrap up the story of the survival and not survival of the rest of the people off the Karluk. And then, of course, we will have a bonus where we will talk about one of Stefansson's next projects after the resounding success of the Karluk expedition. So thank you for listening, as always. Thank you for supporting the show. If you're a patron, if you're not a patron, you should go check it out. And I think with that, we can wrap it up, and we will talk to you again soon. Take care.